think it's going to take a lot of organizations by surprise. These are emotionally charged moments. There are people that are displaced living outside of their addresses. It kind of changes that conversation. It changes the need between the organization.
Is the role of the archive changing in the enterprise? Are we going to start recognizing the value that sits there?
Those archive systems, they are the conversations you've had with customers over the last year, 5 years, 10 years. We are absolutely trying to raise the alarm that there is a different way to think about archives rather than just a storage. We know that you understand your product incredibly well. What I don't know is whether or not you truly understand insurance or healthcare. Yeah. That was, right, I think, a telling point for us.
What's going to be the big thing that's going to change, you think?
Thanks for listening to Above the Tree Line from Treeline Press. This podcast reaches an audience focused on how customer communications reveal the larger story of digital transformation around the world. We look at how AI, customer experience, and capital are reshaping how organizations deliver information, service, and trust. Sponsorships are available for podcasts like this. If your company has a story to tell in this changing market, visit treelinepress.com to learn more.
Chris Murphy, welcome to Above the Tree Line.
Thanks so much for having me, Andy.
Yeah, hey, we had a chance to meet at Innovate in Chicago, and I got to hear a lot about the evolution of customer communications and the direction of SmartCom. So I thought, let's get together and maybe dive into some of that a little bit more and talk through some of the things that I heard and you presented in your roadmap discussion in Chicago. But before we go there, I wanted to get your insight or opinion on something. And you may or may not have read the news or read the article that I wrote today. But yesterday, the SEC proposed a new rule for regulated communications, which would be that they would all be defaulted to digital. And paper would still remain an option, but they're going to say, hey, basically what they're saying is we're going to take the ambiguity away from the regulations that have been holding back the industry. I wanted to start there because you and I last week, we talked about how the US is kind of in a bubble, right? That the transformation story is more difficult in the US than it is in other parts of the world. And I think we agreed, or at least maybe I'm thinking we agreed, that the big part of that is regulations. And so
Absolutely.
I think this rule, if it's proposed, will have massive impact on our industry. I can share that later, but I just want to get your input in terms of what you think this means for Smart and sort of the direction of where particularly the US market is headed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't had the chance to read the article yet, but it's just been a busy few weeks here at Smart Communications. But no, I mean, I think to your point, I think removing the ambiguity is critical, right? I think, when you have regulation and there's lots of, interpretations about how it can be read, about how it's implemented, about how it's tracked, how it's monitored, I think that just allows a lot of gray area to exist, and it muddles, I think, a lot of corporate strategies in that respect, because, the board level titles don't really have a clear direction in the way that they need to go. So, I mean, I do think that that's going to have a massive impact. I think it's going to take a lot of organizations by surprise. I mean, the conversation we had last week hinted a little bit at maybe how other geographies around the world are a little bit more maybe digitally savvy, advanced in their approaches. They've got audiences that I think are a little bit more amenable to receiving digital communications. I mean,
right,
when you think about small things, even small things like transportation infrastructure. I mean, I grew up in London. Public transport is everything, and you're on the phone. You're on the phone on the bus. You're on the phone on the tube, wherever you are, right? So I do think it will have a profound impact, and I think there's going to be a lot that I think a lot of organizations are going to need to not only begin to think about how they create communications digitally, but how they build that infrastructure so they can have conversations over print and digital channels. It's not just a matter of being able to produce an email. It's about a matter of whether or not you have the email address of the person that you're trying to communicate with. So great from the standpoint of kind of like removing ambiguity, but probably there's probably a lot of alarm bells going off in a lot of the organizations that we work with about how it can be implemented.
The other flip side of the coin, the space that I cover, is how the industry volumes are going to be impacted, because it will, I believe, have a significant impact. It was interesting in Chicago, as I spoke to a number of your customers, I would frequently ask them the question, so how much of your outbound communications are still print and sort of digital. And pretty much most of the time it came back and said, oh yeah, we're 100% print and mail. Like, and I was sort of astounded, really. They're like, yeah, we want to go there. But I think a lot of it came down to, frankly, fear, right? We don't know that we can really do it any other way. So this is the way we're going to do it. And I think that once that is cleared away, it'll just have a cascading effect on a lot of other verticals as well. So it'll happen quickly. And I think I've heard the same thing from PSPs in Europe and other parts of the world, where they'll say to me, when it happens fast. And this as well.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think you've raised the point as well. I mean, I think we've used, we potentially projected that the fear that the regulated industries have, and kind of like, right, the ones that we serve, like, the fear we have internally. We've said, well, customers aren't ready for it. Customers really want print. We're working with agents. We're working, through brokers. Print is just an easier way to kind of manage that, those processes. But I think that there is an astounding latent desire for customers to have those digital touch points, or at least have the option to have them. And I think, it'd be interesting to see kind of like, what this new regulation does in the form of like, how do we slowly shrink print and maybe up the digital scale? Is it just a one-time kind of like, cross the chasm and go all in? So it would be interesting to see how that kind of like the ripple effects of it. Yeah.
Well, so let's just shift the conversation a little bit. So, this SEC proposed rule, I mean, it's going to go into a comment period and things, but it's real interesting. They've been waiting for Congress to deal with this for years. And I think with the postage increases this week, they said, you know what, we've had it. So here we are. But it's been a conversation about delivery, right? It's sort of like, so, and, in that delivery, we're always talking, it's got to be, useful to the customer, et cetera. But what I heard a lot of in Chicago was sort of the human part of this story, right? We talk about print, digital, and email, and all this cool AI and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, we're talking about people that, particularly in this case, the insurance vertical, where there is a moment in their life where they just need help. And I think sometimes the technology can get in the way. So you talked a lot about that in Chicago. And so from a smart comms perspective, how do you project that in your platform? I mean, what do you do from a product perspective to make that real?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, when we were in Chicago for our customer conference, we obviously had a number of customers come up and tell their story. One of those specific stories was kind of like, ensuring, telling from the perspective of a claims adjuster, and how technology kind of really helps them to do their job in a different way. That video, if you haven't seen it, it's part of our kind of Be Moved theme. It's available on our website. Right. So definitely check it out. But it's a pretty powerful story. I mean, one, I think, from our perspective, there's a couple of reasons why we wanted to kind of really shine a light on that. It's not just really around elevating the role that a lot of, frankly, I mean, IT teams or kind of CCM teams or digital process management teams, like the role that they have in the business is actually supporting incredibly important parts of that customer journey, right? When it's filing a claim, whether or not it's, receiving a healthcare decision, whether or not it's potentially opening a bank account or a retirement account. So like, we wanted to shine a light on those moments because that's ultimately, we serve 100% kind of regulated industries. That's where we've kind of cut our teeth, and that's where we play. But like, these are emotionally charged parts of an interaction. They're not receiving a communication and that's the end of it. It's part of an ongoing process, especially if you think about what's happening in the US with catastrophe management. There are, people that are displaced, they're living outside of their typical addresses. It kind of changes that conversation. It changes the momentum. It changes the need between the organization and the insured. So a lot of what we do is try to elevate those moments. We try to kind of free up whether or not it's an adjuster, an advisor, whoever's kind of utilizing our software to really connect them with the value that the organization is offering their customers at the end of the day. So that's kind of like part of the theme that we have been focusing on. I think from a platform perspective, how we build to support those themes, I think, there's a number of different ways, whether or not it's from an efficiency standpoint, whether or not it's kind of like operating within the systems that they work in on a daily basis. But I do think, part of that is really around clarity. It's around making sure that there is some kind of, whether or not it's concise communications, whether or not it's the right message, whether or not it's kind of delivered at the right moment, and whether or not there's action that can be, like whether or not the follow-up happens, right? So it's around kind of offering clarity, I think, as much as possible for the organizations that use our software, but also those that are then able to offer that clarity in the conversations they're having with their end customers.
What you were describing is context, right? Understanding context and where that comes from, and is it accurate? And the whole part about clarity sort of gets to this idea of being accurate isn't enough, right? It's sort of like, yeah, we can be, completely accurate on the letter of the law in terms of the details on the statement, but it's kind of not what we're talking about. It's got to be accurate, but it's got to be understandable, right?
Yeah, and I do see this kind of like, this concept of, a compliance first mindset. I mean, I do see that starting to shift, right? I mean, like it's, we've spoken about it for years, and kind of like, I do think that there is much more of an awareness that a communication is not a discrete deliverable. It doesn't end or start a process. It is part of a process. And I think that there's much more awareness that they can be improved as well. Right. I mean, it's not just kind of like, hey, let's just make sure we don't get fined or sued. It's like, hey, this is part of an ongoing dialogue. We can educate, we can promote, we can let them know about services that they may not be using. Like there's value. I think it was Marcy Maddox at IEC. I mean, like spoke a lot about kind of the idea of that customer value exchange, and like CCM plays like such an important role, and it's underutilized. I mean, if you're an insurance company and you're only sending a communication at time of policy issuance or renewal, or when there's a claim, right? You're not representing the value that you place on the customer in a fairly open way. I mean, it's just like very transactional in that respect.
Well, and there's another side of this too that was touched on at Innovate, but we as an industry don't talk about as much, and that's the employee, right? That's the person on the other end of the phone that's trying to be the human and to have the empathy and to get that information. Where's, how does Smart think about that? Because it's a big part of the equation, I think.
It is a big part of the equation. I mean, I've only been in kind of the traditional CCM space for about 8 or 9 years, which is a long time in technology, but it's also like nothing in CCM. Like I'm still considered a newbie, but that focus on the employee experience is huge. I mean, it's not just huge from an efficiency standpoint, but I think, lots of organizations are thinking about this now from how do I attract top talent? Like when we think about part of what, Smart IQ does from a data collection perspective. Sure. Sometimes it's external facing, sometimes it's internal facing, but a lot of organizations now are like trying to, like, out-of-date tools and legacy processes are turning people off from accepting jobs inside of organizations. And so the focus on that employee experience is not just a matter of making it efficient and easier for them to use, but it's also, I think, hugely important from a talent acquisition and retention standpoint as well.
Yeah, training, onboarding, all of that stuff, I think would be a significant part of that. So
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So these customer experiences about sort of in the moment, it's about bringing sort of that human element to this process. And it's kind of an interesting conversation to be having when all we're talking about seems like is AI. We're going to get to that. But you brought up Amy, and she was talking about how sort of the nature, and you just touched on it, sort of the nature of CCM is evolving, right? We're moving beyond just this idea of, hey, I got to send Chris a bill, so please get some data and put it on a piece of paper and print it and put it in the mail, right? That's sort of I'm simplifying, all due respect to people out there, but that's kind of how a lot of people thought about it. How is that changing? How is the role of CCM, or what it traditionally was, evolving in the enterprise? And, I heard the term a lot, becoming infrastructure, right? It's becoming not just this utility thing that has to sit in the basement and just does a job, but becoming sort of mission critical part of the enterprise stack kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I mean, I think it's something that has definitely evolved over time. I mean, I think, you've seen evidence of this as not only, us as a traditionally, I mean, we were a traditional CCM software solution, even though we've kind of like had our kind of key differentiators in the market. But you've seen other CCM softwares kind of like evolve with their offerings, with where they're focusing their time and their R&D dollars. I mean, and we are no different. And I mean, I think it comes from a lot of it shifts in the strategic emphasis that that we as an industry have about like the importance of these touch points. And it does become less of a, hey, I'm going to buy, like, this is a commoditized software decision that I'm going to make and I'm going to implement. And it does become kind of like more of an infrastructure layer. Now, I think it's important to recognize that there's lots more that has to go with that, right? I mean, I think we'll get into probably orchestration in a little bit, but I think, we are moving much more from a document as an output to recognizing that there are outcomes at the end of this. What goes into it? What data do I need? Where does data need to transfer hands? What are the workflow process? Who's involved? So there's definitely a lot more that goes into this kind of slow evolution from a traditional kind of CCM centric mindset or a document centric mindset to something that's much more, I think, aligned with customer value, with customer outcomes, with looking at other parts of the business that this can begin to play a role. I mean, we have a lot more conversations with marketing teams now than we did, 5-10 years ago as well, just because some of those kind of areas are beginning to blend together. If I've got, I don't know, an email platform that I'm sending emails to, or a marketing automation platform, kind of like when's the right time to utilize those? When's the right time to potentially use a, more traditional kind of CCM's solution to manage those digital processes as well. So yeah, it's definitely been kind of like, I think the time is ripe for some kind of new thinking in this CCM space to kind of really position the value that we provide.
So are we still, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Amy. Are we calling it the right thing? I don't know what to call it. I call it future CCM because I feel like another 3-letter acronym is, isn't helpful. I don't know.
Does that like, is that FCCM? Is that what we're going to like
FCCM.
shorten that down to? No, I mean, I do think it's, we struggle with this a lot. I mean, kind of like, I'm not just kind of like have a product lens, but I also have a marketing lens as well. I mean, I think what you call something really matters. I do think CCM does a lot of the integral processes that we're involved with a disservice. I think it does kind of commoditize a lot of what we do. But it's tough, right? We've struggled with this as a business as well. It's kind of like, where do we go next? How do we carve that path? How do we carve out the parts of that category that we own and we maybe don't play with? But yeah, I think CCM is rooted from things that were very important 20 years ago. And I think it is kind of like, time for either us to put a modifier, as you've done, Andy, or to kind of like, really kind of carve out a whole other category for where it fits.
Well, I think the one distinguishing characteristic that I always turn to is regulations. Now, those regulations they're just regulations, right? You got to follow them. And yeah. I think that's the one area that, you mentioned MarTech, and I sort of look at the MarTech space and go, well, maybe they're going to give us a name before we figure out what to call ourselves, because I think our importance to them, as you mentioned, is increasing, right? It's about not just customer experience, but brand experience and all the kinds of things that the marketing folks like to think about. And so I still think a lot about what we call this thing, in the future. And I think maybe this is a good segue then to the next part, which is, maybe the way we sort of earn a new definition or a new category in the space is some of the things you're doing with like, SmartPath and Smart IQ with orchestration, right? This is where we're able to go to the business and say, hey, we can actually do a lot of stuff for you. And I think that's where the brain, the marketing people and even the finance people say, hey, there's value in understanding that data. Is that one possible path to sort of expand the definition of CCM to incorporate sort of a broader scope of capabilities? I don't know.
Yeah, that's been part of kind of like our DNA for quite some time. I mean, we've grown both kind of organically, but inorganically as well. And as part of that, we've, introduced what we see as very overlapping but adjacent technologies into the traditional CCM space, whether or not it's from a data collection standpoint, whether or not it's from an archive or an orchestration standpoint. I mean, we see these as very interconnected parts of a broader process. I think you're 100% right that it's the regulatory space that we need to ensure that we are not leaving, right? Like that's the bubble that I think makes us so sticky inside of organizations and so valuable inside of organizations. I mean, I actually came before the CCM space. I spent a lot of time in the digital marketing space, kind of like more on the kind of email and mobile messaging spaces. But in every year, I think it was Scott Brinker used to come out with like the MarTech landscape, and every year it would essentially double in size as like more and more players got into analytics and mobile messaging and brand, like customer, voice of customer technology. I mean, like that space has had a significant explosion in the number of vendors and the investment that it's had as well. But I think where we sit, it's bigger than CCM. I don't think we want to kind of compete in the traditional MarTech space. But like that line of differentiation, that line of the swim lane we want to stay into is very much kind of like, hey, we want to ensure that you are being compliant, you have full auditability, you're applying by the regulations, we're surfacing kind of like, we've got the right mix of functionality and capabilities that allow you to remain compliant. And that could be just the sending of a communication, which is fairly cut and dried, but it's like, am I keeping the data secure across an entire onboarding process, for example? So I think you're right. I mean, it could be interesting whether or not we as an industry come up with a new name, whether or not a new name is thrust upon us, and whether or not we're going to like it if we get it.
Anyways, so you just said a lot of stuff that I think we haven't even talked about AI. And I think if you lump AI into that, everything you just talked about from a sort of managing sort of the flow of information around enterprise, you throw AI in there and you throw regulated industry in there, you go, now I have to actually just prove where all these bits of information came from, that they were accurate, that they were reviewed by the right, this whole idea of being able to pull the thread of truth through a communication in an environment like that becomes really complex. Does it not? I mean, I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
No, it does. It does. I mean, I think, I think the one thing that we found as we've introduced AI capabilities, we've had lots of conversations with lots of different departments, lots of interested parties around AI adoption and kind of like, how we move the needle and what do they care about? What do they not care about? I think the one thing we found out is like no organization is the same, right? And it's like, they are not only interpreting regulations slightly differently or kind of frameworks slightly differently. They've got their own internal operating groups that will allow them to do some things, but not others. Some organizations just want us to kind of like explicitly exclude any involvement in AI just because they haven't yet got those processes in place. And we've got other kind of like, early adopters that are like, pushing us to do more, to move faster. So I do think, we definitely see that there's a lot more board level attention around AI. I think, as C-level executives push down to other parts of the organization, that kind of pressure comes on to the vendors that they rely on and the partners that they work with, and whether or not that's from an operational efficiency, whether or not it's from a cost saving perspective. But like those are some of the conversations that we're having at the moment. It's like how can we not only be a little bit more like, we don't just want AI as a kind of like a nice button that maybe makes content a little bit better. Like we want it to be fully embedded in workflows that's having like tangible impact on real metrics that we care about so that we can report back on it. So I think it's definitely, something that we track as a business. We've had lots of conversations, especially with our customer advisory board. But like we're getting good guidance on the best way that we can approach the different levels of maturity, the different processes that organizations have, and frankly, I mean, even some of the different architectural decisions that they're making. It's not just about, whether or not they use embedded artificial intelligence in some of the workflows that we're managing. They may want to plug into other workflows that they are managing 100% themselves, right? And with, getting into conversations around agent to agent communications there. So there is no shortage of options. There is no clear path. And it is something that, I think as an industry in the regulated space, it's a challenging space to operate in, to both kind of be able to do more, move fast, but also don't lose track of the fact that we need to be grounded, governed, contextual, compliant as well. So right. Those are the fun challenges that we have as an industry.
Above the Tree Line podcasts like this are open for sponsorship. This podcast reaches an audience focused on how customer communications reveal the larger story of digital transformation around the world. We look at how AI, customer experience, and capital are reshaping how organizations deliver information, service, and trust. For sponsors, this creates an opportunity to be part of a focused conversation with an audience that's already paying attention to where the market is heading. Treeline Press works with organizations through sponsorships, branded podcasts, executive interviews, event coverage, moderated discussions, and more. These opportunities are designed for companies that need to explain where they fit into this changing market. To learn more about sponsorship, media hosting, and event coverage opportunities, visit treelinepress.com.
That's the moat, as the tech bros would say, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's our moat. Right. No, and I agree with that. And I believe inside of that, there's an expansive opportunity for the industry to sort of embrace that and really find new opportunities in the enterprise. So, we've talked a lot about the history and orchestration and infrastructure. I kind of want to just take maybe a step back, and I have this question for you, and I just like to ask these philosophical questions. Are we, we kind of move the conversation, language maybe is a better way to put it. We say that we have conversations with customers. Are we really having conversations, or is it still sort of one way, I got to tell you something, and I think we're trying to think about a world where it is just this fluid, conversational interaction, between us and our bank and insurance company. You think that's possible, or where are we? I mean, is that truly sort of the state of the art in terms of, we used to call it interactive, and now I think it's conversational is the next term. And I'm just kind of curious where you see that headed.
You didn't prep me for this question, so I'm gonna.
No, I know I didn't. I was thinking about it as you were talking, and I was just like, I don't know, and it came up on my screen too.
Yeah, I am philosophically hopeful that we are moving in that direction, and I mean, I don't just think it's from I think we've often kind of grounded conversations as back and forth, and we think about like the human conversation that we are having right now. I think the relationship between you and an insurance company or you and a bank, I mean, I think it's absolutely feasible for them to have a conversation, but maybe just it's a different type of conversation. I mean, like, I think when I think about the word conversation, I was able to share my point of view. I was able to interact, kind of like there is a back and forth, right? And that back and forth could be, hey, I was able to potentially, I was able to engage via my channel of preference. I was able to get towards an outcome quicker. I was able to, you said that you were going to respond to me. You did. I've got an idea about kind of what's happening next in the process. I think those parts can all be interpreted as part of a conversation. And I think that gap will shrink, right? I mean, we chatted last week about kind of like the use of WhatsApp and some of those immediate kind of responses that you can get from businesses. And, we'll probably be having the conversation in 10 years time about kind of like, when's the US going to really embrace kind of WhatsApp as a channel? But yeah, I mean, I do think we are getting better about it. I mean, even the language we use in communications, like I mean, I've recently had kind of like, I think I shared this story Innovate, our conference as well in Chicago, but like I've recently had the misfortune of like having to go through like a probate process. It's not fun for like a number of reasons, but that's a part of the world that's just been untouched, it seems, in 30 years. It was like, hey, please fax a copy of the death certificate. I was like, where do I even go find a fax machine now that can so I can't remember exactly why I went onto this topic. I was probably but like, yeah, anyway, I think kind of like, to me, I'm a hopeful optimist. I think that we are moving in the right direction. I think, organizations are embracing this concept of, maybe not everything has to be a document, not everything has to be scanned or OCR'd and rekeyed. There are ways to bridge some of those gaps and shrink those gaps to make it feel more like a conversation. Where do you think we are?
Well, I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, oftentimes when these conversations start, customer is a form, right? Mm-hmm. Fill out the form.
Yeah.
And, I know that Smart has done a lot of work trying to make those forms more conversational and, less, oh my gosh, there's 50 fields here I have to fill out. Where do you think we're going with forms in terms of making that experience less sort of, I don't know, making it more conversational, I guess is where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, like we've done some great work. I encourage you to kind of like look at what we call the Smart IQ kind of agent infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, we've done a lot of work over the years, kind of like shifting the paradigm from static PDFs, fill it out, send it in, fax it in, scan it, where somebody then has to kind of rekey that whole thing to kind of like fully digital guided dynamic experience that can be filled out, on your phone as you're on the tube in London or on your desktop or going in between, right? So that's been we've seen like a tremendous response from the introduction of that technology. I mean, just kind of really shifting the paradigm for lots of organizations about shrinking time to value, turnaround time, kind of error rates, and kind of like, where we've seen that potentially evolve to is, organizations want a very kind of structured, deterministic way to collect information, right? So the data collection, the rules and the structure around that data collection doesn't really go away. But we've introduced it into like maybe chat experiences or voice experiences. So we've exposed that kind of deterministic data collection process, but made it accessible to, brand new channels of interactions. I think that's where, that's where I think there can be an incredible amount of innovation, and we're having conversations with lots of customers about like ways that they may want to employ this, whether or not it's getting an estimate for a medical procedure fully over the phone, right? Collecting some information, you are determining it, you're doing the calculations, you may be marrying it with core system data. But as a way to kind of really engage customers during those types of processes, I mean, I think it's incredibly powerful. So yeah, thank you for asking the question. I think there's a lot of work that we've done to date, and I think we can be very proud of what we've done on the Smart IQ side specifically. But I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity moving forward as well.
Yeah. Well, when you collect the data, you got to store it. So when I was in Chicago, I heard a lot of conversation about the archive and the role of Smart Hub. And, as we're moving into a world of AI, there's a desire now to get a deeper understanding of our customers, or a customer having a deeper understanding of their history with that company. And all that information sits in an archive. So Yanni was describing in great detail some of the things that the Smart Hub platform is able to do. Maybe is the role of the archive changing in the enterprise? Are we going to start recognizing the value that sits there, and how do we sort of tell that story so companies can sort of see what's possible there?
Yeah, I hope it's changing because it's as to your point, it's not very exciting the way that it is at the moment. I mean, I think as you look at the traditional notion of archive, it is just a repository, right? I mean, it is just a compliance requirement, often used just to collect data. And I think when we've chatted a little bit about AI and the role that that can play, but the role of data in powering AI, I think is I think a natural progression to us rethinking the role that archive and retrieval systems can begin to have as well. I mean, there is so much inherent power and context and intelligence in those archive systems. I mean, they are the conversations you've had with customers over the last year, 5 years, 10 years. And so like there is, we are absolutely trying to kind of raise the alarm that there is a different way to think about archives rather than just a storage paradigm to one that is a source of intelligence. I think there are a couple of patterns that are definitely emerging. I mean, we definitely see this kind of shift from a store once, retrieve never, or retrieve rarely. I think that retrieval aspect or the retrieval volumes we are definitely seeing as something that is or should absolutely be increasing. And that's had some commercial implications for kind of maybe some of those older archive systems that, are potentially priced very expensively for the retrievals. But we definitely see, patterns, whether or not it's around, right to access, right to forget, whether or not it's training AI models, whether or not it's, increasing the amount of communications that are stored on portals, whether or not it's just an increase in the number of communications that are being, sent to an individual over the course of their kind of relationship with you. I mean, if you think about layering not only all the paper and print, but with digital and those other touch points as well. So I think retrieval is definitely a pattern that we've seen increasing, but we are very much at a point in time where we are focusing in on the ways that we can really extract the value of those archived communications, documents, conversations, the collected information between the customer and the organization, and really begin to derive value from it. And that's kind of like that's kind of the direction that we are heading with it. So I mean, in answer to your question, are we rethinking, or is the industry ready? I don't know. We'll find out.
Well, isn't it in part being driven by AI's desire to kind of know more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it's so important to be able to train models and to derive intelligence from real data. And those archives are in lots of organizations are not even accessible to some of the newer parts of the AI infrastructure.
Yeah. So would you see that kind of AI functionality different from the AI that perhaps produces a communication, or is it all part of the same bucket?
I think they're doing different things. I mean, I would say, can you potentially apply similar technologies to solve the problems? Yes, I think but I think a lot of what we found is that there is a fair amount of tuning of how we're applying AI to get the most amount of value from the particular workflow that it's been applied to. I mean, some of the things that we're doing around the archive system in general is to actually wrap the service in an MCP server so that we can interrogate what's inside of the archive system. And that could be, hey, we want to ensure that we are understanding at the micro level what information we may have on Andy, who accessed Andy's records. How does he interact with us? Is there an indication that he's reducing his spend? Is he a churn risk, right? So like at the very individual level, I think that there's intelligence that can be derived from these systems, but also at the macro level, it's kind of like, how are my claims volumes increasing over time? Do I need to, is that giving me an indication of ways that I can operationally improve? I think kind of like how we can apply some of the emerging AI technology is slightly different based specifically on the use case itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sort of some of those artifacts that sort of get spun off as different, processes in the business sort of rise or fall based on the use of AI. That's kind of an interesting perspective.
Absolutely.
So technology, of course, and smart comms invest a lot in technology, but technology isn't what it's all about, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about regulations. We've talked about banking and insurance and sort of these, mission vertical markets. But how is Smart really bringing expertise and value to that space? Because there's a lot going on, and I think the stakes are pretty high for customers, right? They can't, right? It's got to get done right the first time. But how is Smart helping its customers sort of understand the value that you can deliver and what your platform's capable of? What is Smart investing in? And sort of, I guess this is the people side of the equation.
Yeah, I think that, in general, it's always incumbent on us as a technology partner or a technology provider to make it clear the value that we're providing from a technology perspective as well. We think about that in terms of, how we price, kind of some of the reports that we surface, kind of some of the operational insights. So I think that's just incumbent on us as a software provider. And I think there's actually increasing pressure to do that in the software space. I think, lots of questions are being asked about potential kind of overlap with incumbent systems. There's a lot of talk around consolidation of multiple systems and, moving away from more of decentralized kind of buying of systems to saying why do we have 6 of these systems that essentially do the same thing? So it's obviously something that we care about greatly from a software perspective, but there's also a lot more. I'm definitely a whole product advocate. It's not just about the technology; it's about the training, the onboarding, the expertise that you get from different parts of the organization. How can our customers feedback to make it better? The feedback processes that we have. So we've done a number of things. We've invested a lot in making sure that our customers get up and running and get time to value quickly. I think that's been, some of that has been an architectural approach. We are architected in such a way that makes it a little bit easier for us to turn on tenancies or kind of instantly provision pieces. But we're also we've invested in what we'd say vertical expertise. We've got a number of individuals across the organization, across the globe, that are not necessarily CCM experts, but they are insurance experts and they are financial services experts or healthcare experts. And, we apply a lot of their knowledge and expertise in both kind of informing where we need to go, potentially regulations that we need to be able to better be able to adhere to, the workflow processes that we have. So that's, I think, a real kind of strong differentiator for us. I remember years and years ago, we had a partner say to us, it's kind of we know that you understand your product. You have a great product. You understand your product incredibly well. What I don't know is whether or not you truly understand insurance or healthcare. Yeah. And so that was, right, I think, a telling point for us, knowing where we want to play, knowing that we need to be that credible solution in the space to kind of really double down on the investments we made specifically around our vertical expertise.
So what kind of new skills do you think we need to develop as an industry? Are we, because again, we could go back 25 and 30 years ago and I can tell you what we were talking about. I'm not sure that's necessarily true anymore.
Yeah. It's always funny. I always think about kind of, I find myself saying please and thank you when I, write in Copilot, and that's just I need to get a lot more efficient with the prompts that I am asking. But I guarantee my kids are going to be great. They're gonna know exactly what to write and how to get the best results out of AI. Yeah, I do think it is a mindset shift. I do think we do engage in a lot of conversations with organizations, and it's just let's just take it back from a cloud or SaaS standpoint. We're talking about knowledge around technologies such as S3 buckets and Azure blobs, and it's about Lambda functions. I mean, like there is very much a technology component that we need to work with our customers. But I will say there is a recognition that they need to make the changes to these modern technologies because it's becoming increasingly difficult to get the human capital to run those old legacy systems.
Well, that's why I opened up the conversation about asking about this new SEC rule, because the cascading long-term effect of that could be pretty consequential.
Absolutely.
So, Chris, before I ask my last question, did we miss anything, or is there anything that you want to clarify?
I don't think so. I think that this is it's good. I'll play it back if there's anything that I have butchered.
So, Chris, I've really enjoyed getting to know you. So in a couple of years, when we're sitting down having this same conversation, what are we going to be talking about? Are we going to be talking about a different name for CCM, the role of, the archive and context? What's going to be the big thing that's going to change, you think?
I hope it's the role that whatever this new future CCM, customer engagement, customer experience management, the role that we play, I hope it's about how we have helped to elevate the value that we offer inside the organizations that we work in, right? I hope it's kind of like, it is much more of a strategic priority. We have been able to articulate the value that we provide as an industry. Rather than just a cost center, I hope that we've flipped that script and really help to elevate the status of what we do. Because I mean, it is a mature space, but it is also, there's always dynamism in the space. There's always things that are changing. There's new innovation from us, from other vendors in the space as well. So I mean, I do think that there's a lot of life and momentum. Hopefully that's what we're talking about. I'm sure we'll still be talking about changes in regulations as well. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon, and the impact that's going to have on the industries that have to absorb it. So some things will change, some things won't.
Well, like you said, that's our moat, so we're going to protect it, right?
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. It's going to be fun to see how Smart, evolves, around some of those things you discussed, and the way that we talk about the industry is really going to be fascinating. So I'll look forward to that conversation in the future. Until then, thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks for listening to Above the Treeline from Treeline Press. This podcast reaches an audience focused on how customer communications reveal the larger story of digital transformation around the world. If your company has a story to tell about how AI, customer experience, or technology are reshaping how organizations deliver information, service, and trust, visit treelinepress.com to learn more.